I was standing in my workshop at 6 in the morning when everything went dark, and I mean everything. The fluorescent lights above my workbench flickered out, my drill press wound down with a pathetic whine, and even the small radio in the corner died mid-sentence. I stood there holding a rebuilt water pump impeller, blinking in the sudden darkness that was only partially relieved by the weak dawn light filtering through the windows. My name is Robert Anderson, and I run the only water pump repair shop in Meadowbrook Springs, Arizona, a sprawling community of about 3,000 homes built around a series of man-made lakes and retention ponds. The place looks like someone dropped a slice of suburban paradise into the Sonoran Desert, complete with manicured lawns, palm trees, and exactly 17 different shades of beige siding that the HOA approved back in 2019. I bought my property here 5 years ago, specifically because it was zoned for mixed residential and light commercial use. The previous owner had run a small accounting firm out of the same building. I walked outside, squinting against the Arizona sun that was already promising another scorcher, and immediately spotted the problem. The main breaker box on the side of my workshop had been opened, and every single breaker was flipped to the off position. More than that, there was a bright orange sticker plastered across the panel that read, "Electrical service discontinued by order of Meadowbrook Springs HOA," in aggressive block letters. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, reaching for the breakers. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice came from behind me, sharp and self-satisfied. I turned to find Geraldine Vandermeer standing at the edge of my property line, arms crossed over her chest, wearing what I'd come to think of as her standard uniform. A white visor, a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the breast, and an expression that suggested she had just caught someone committing murder. Geraldine was the president of the Meadowbrook Springs HOA board, a position she had held for the past 7 years, through a combination of relentless campaigning and the fact that most residents would rather pay their dues and be left alone than get involved in community politics. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, with blonde hair that was definitely enhanced in a salon and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Geraldine," I said, keeping my voice level. "What's going on here?" "What's going on, Mr. Anderson, is that you are in violation of Section 4.7 of the Meadowbrook Springs Community Guidelines, which clearly states that no commercial vehicle storage or repair facilities are permitted within residential zones." I stared at her. "My workshop is on commercially zoned property. I have the permits. You know this. We've been over this." She pulled out a folder that she had been holding against her side, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. "The county has reclassified this entire development as residential only, effective as of last month. Your commercial variance is no longer valid. The board voted unanimously to enforce compliance." "Last month? Nobody told me anything about this." "A notice was mailed to all affected property owners," Geraldine said, her tone suggesting that this was my problem, not hers. "You have 30 days to cease all commercial operations and remove any commercial equipment from the premises. Until then, we have revoked your access to community electrical services." "Community electrical services? I pay my own electric bill directly to Arizona Power and Electric." "But the lines run through HOA-maintained easements, which gives us the authority to restrict access for zoning violations." She snapped the folder shut. "I suggest you contact the board office to discuss your compliance timeline. Have a good day, Mr. Anderson." She turned and walked away, her white tennis shoes crunching on the gravel driveway. I stood there, heat already building against my back, and contemplated just flipping the breakers anyway. But I knew Geraldine. If I did that, she would call the county, claim I was tampering with electrical infrastructure, and make my life even more complicated. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, a woman named Patricia Rhodes, who had handled my property purchase and business licensing. She answered on the third ring. "Patricia, it's Rob Anderson. I need your help. The HOA just killed power to my workshop, and they're claiming my commercial zoning got revoked." There was a pause. "Wait. Slow down. What happened?" I explained the situation while walking back inside my now powerless workshop. The morning sun was already making the metal building heat up like an oven. I had 3 pump rebuilds that needed to be finished by the end of the week, including one for a commercial landscaping company that serviced half the properties in Meadowbrook Springs. "Okay," Patricia said when I finished. "First thing, I'm going to check with the county about this rezoning claim. That's not something that typically happens without a lengthy public process. Second, even if there was a rezoning, the HOA can't just cut your power without following proper legal procedures. This sounds like an illegal utility shutoff. Can you get it turned back on?" "I'll work on it. Give me a few hours. In the meantime, don't touch those breakers. I want to document this exactly as it is." I spent the next 20 minutes taking photos of everything: the breaker box, the orange sticker, the timestamps on my security cameras showing exactly when the power died. Then I started making phone calls to my customers, explaining that there would be a delay in their service. The third call was to Miguel Santos, who ran the landscaping company I mentioned. "How long are we talking?" he asked when I explained the situation. "I don't know yet. Maybe a day or two while I get this sorted out with the HOA. Rob, I need that pump. I've got irrigation systems going down all over Meadowbrook, and you're the only guy within 50 miles who stocks parts for these systems." Something clicked in my brain. "Say that again." "You're the only repair shop that works on these pumps. The next closest place is in Tucson, and they don't keep parts in stock. I'd be looking at a week minimum, and I've got contracts that specify maximum downtime." I sat down on my workbench, mind racing. "Miguel, how many of your jobs are inside Meadowbrook Springs?" "Maybe 60%. The HOA properties are my bread and butter. Why?" "Just curious. Let me call you back." I hung up and started going through my customer database. It was something I'd been meaning to organize properly for months, but now I was grateful for the detailed notes I had kept. It took me about an hour working from my laptop battery, but the picture became very clear. Meadowbrook Springs had a complicated water infrastructure. The development was built around a series of man-made lakes that were filled by a combination of reclaimed water and deep wells. The whole system ran on specialized pumps, specific models that required particular expertise to service and repair. The developer had installed them 15 years ago, going with a brand that was efficient but not widely used. I was the authorized repair facility for those pumps within a 100-mile radius. More than that, I had the only local inventory of critical spare parts: seals, impellers, bearings, motor housings, stuff that couldn't be overnighted from Amazon. Without me, any pump failure in Meadowbrook Springs would mean days, possibly weeks, of downtime while parts were shipped in and someone from Tucson or Phoenix made the drive out. I started checking the maintenance schedules. The main community lake pumps were due for service in 2 weeks. The irrigation system pumps for the common areas were on a rotating schedule, with 2 scheduled for this week. The fountain in front of the clubhouse had already been acting up, according to my notes from a conversation with the facilities manager 3 weeks ago. My phone rang. "Patricia." "Rob, I've got news. The rezoning is real, but it only applies to new commercial applications. Your existing commercial variance is grandfathered in under state law. The HOA is either ignorant or deliberately misrepresenting the situation. Can you get my power back?" "I'm drafting an emergency motion right now. We should be able to get in front of a judge by tomorrow morning. But Rob, there's something else. Even with the rezoning, they can't just cut your utilities. That's an illegal self-help eviction under Arizona law. You could sue for damages." "How long would a lawsuit take?" "Months, maybe a year." "I don't have months. I've got customers who need their equipment back this week." "Then we focus on the emergency injunction. Sit tight." I sat tight. I also started making a list of every single HOA-related property that depended on my services. The main community center had a pool with circulation pumps that I serviced. The clubhouse had the fountain. There were 6 different irrigation systems for common areas. 3 of the retention ponds had aeration pumps to prevent algae buildup. The list went on. Around noon, my phone started ringing. The first call was from the Meadowbrook Springs facilities manager, a harried-sounding guy named Tom. "Rob, we've got a problem. The pump for Pond C just died, and the water's already starting to smell. Can you get out here this afternoon?" "Tom, I'd love to help, but the HOA cut power to my workshop this morning. I can't even test equipment, let alone rebuild a pump." There was a long silence. "What? Why would they do that?" "Zoning dispute. They claim I'm not supposed to be running a commercial operation." But you're our only pump guy. I'm aware. You might want to mention that to Geraldine Vandermeer. Another silence. This is insane. Okay, let me make some calls. The second call came from a homeowner on Saguaro Drive who had hired me to replace a well pump for his property. The third was from another landscaping company. By mid-afternoon, I had received 14 calls, and I had to keep explaining the situation over and over. Around 4 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Tom, the facilities manager, looking stressed. "Rob, I just spent the last 3 hours trying to find someone else who can work on our pumps. The nearest authorized service center is in Tucson. They don't have the parts we need, and they're backed up for 2 weeks anyway. We're screwed if we can't get you back online." "I know," I said. "Believe me, I want to work. But my hands are tied until the HOA backs down or a judge orders them to restore my power. What if I talk to Geraldine?" "Be my guest." He left, and I went back to my laptop, running on battery power and my phone's hotspot. Patricia had emailed me a draft of the emergency motion. It was thorough, citing multiple Arizona statutes about illegal utility shutoffs, grandfathered commercial use, and improper HOA enforcement procedures. We had a hearing scheduled for 9 the next morning. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Anderson, this is Brenda Chen. I'm on the HOA board. I just heard about what happened with your power." "Did you vote for it?" There was a pause. "The vote happened at a special session I wasn't aware of. Geraldine called it with just the bare quorum, her plus 2 other board members. I found out this afternoon when Tom called me about the pond pump. So you're saying this wasn't actually a unanimous board decision?" "Not even close. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to be direct with you. I think Geraldine overstepped badly here, and I think she's about to find out exactly how badly. Can you hold on until tomorrow?" "I don't have much choice." "Fair enough. I'll see what I can do on my end." She hung up, and I sat in my increasingly dark workshop, thinking. The sun was setting, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. Without power, I didn't even have lights. I locked up and went into my house, which was on a separate meter and still had electricity, thank God. The next morning, I dressed in my best slacks and button-down shirt and drove to the county courthouse in downtown Phoenix. Patricia met me outside, carrying a briefcase and looking confident. "The HOA's attorney just arrived," she said. "Guy named Dennis Morrison. He's got a reputation for being aggressive, but not particularly careful about the details." We went inside and found our courtroom. Judge Sarah Whitman presided, a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. The HOA was represented by Morrison, a portly man in an expensive suit, and Geraldine herself sitting at the defendant's table, looking supremely unbothered. The hearing took about 45 minutes. Patricia presented our case, methodically walking through the evidence. My grandfathered commercial variance, the lack of proper notice, the illegal utility shutoff, the economic damages I was suffering. She even brought up the fact that the HOA's own facilities were being impacted by their decision to shut me down. Morrison's counter-argument was basically that the HOA had the authority to enforce community standards and that I was running an industrial operation in a residential area. He kept using the phrase community character, as if my workshop was somehow ruining the aesthetic of Meadowbrook Springs. Judge Whitman listened to both sides, asked a few pointed questions about the grandfathering provisions, and then made her ruling. "But I'm issuing a temporary restraining order requiring the HOA to restore Mr. Anderson's electrical service immediately. The evidence clearly shows that his commercial operation predates the rezoning and is protected under Arizona's grandfathering statutes. Furthermore, the method used to disconnect his utilities appears to violate state law regarding self-help evictions. We'll schedule a full hearing on the underlying issues for 3 weeks from now, but in the meantime, Mr. Anderson's power is to be restored within 4 hours. Morrison started to object, but the judge cut him off. 4 hours, counsel. Make it happen. We walked out of the courtroom, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in 2 days. Patricia grinned at me. That went well. Thanks for moving so fast on this. Thank me after you get your power back. Keep an eye on that 4-hour deadline. If they drag their feet, call me immediately. I drove back to Meadowbrook Springs, got to my workshop at around 11, and waited. Noon came and went. 1 o'clock. At 2, I called Patricia. They haven't shown up yet. It's only been 3 hours. Give them the full 4, but be ready to document if they miss the deadline. At 3:15, a white pickup truck with the HOA logo pulled into my driveway. 2 men got out, both wearing contractor vests and looking uncomfortable. One of them approached me. "Mr. Anderson, we're here to restore your electrical service." About time. They went to the breaker box, removed the orange sticker, and flipped all the breakers back on. Inside the workshop, I heard my equipment hum back to life. The relief was immediate and profound. "We need you to sign this," one of the contractors said, handing me a clipboard. It was a form acknowledging that the power had been restored. I signed it, noted the time, and took a photo of the signed document with my phone. The contractors left, and I immediately got to work. I had 3 days of backlog to catch up on, and customers who were waiting. The first thing I did was finish the pump rebuild for Miguel's landscaping company. He showed up personally to pick it up at 5. "Man, you're a lifesaver," he said, loading the rebuilt pump into his truck. "I've got 3 systems down right now, and the HOA's been breathing down my neck about the dead grass." Ironic, considering they're the ones who shut me down. I heard about that. Word's getting around. People are not happy with Geraldine right now. Over the next few days, I worked 16-hour shifts to catch up. Every customer who came by had heard about the power shutoff, and most of them had opinions about the HOA's decision. The general consensus was that Geraldine had made a serious miscalculation. On the 4th day, after getting my power back, I got a call from Tom, the facilities manager. "Rob, we've got an emergency. The main pump for Lake A just failed. Complete motor burnout. We need a replacement ASAP." Lake A was the largest of the man-made lakes in Meadowbrook Springs, a centerpiece of the community that was visible from the clubhouse and surrounded by some of the most expensive homes in the development. Without the pump, the water would stagnate within days. "I can get you a rebuilt motor by tomorrow afternoon," I said, mentally reviewing my inventory. "But it's going to cost more than usual. That's a big unit, and I'll have to prioritize it over other jobs." "How much more?" I quoted him a price that was fair but not cheap. He didn't even haggle. "Do it. I'll have a purchase order to you within the hour." I spent the rest of that day and most of the night working on the pump motor. These units were serious pieces of equipment, weighing about 200 pounds and requiring specialized tools to rebuild. I had to replace the windings, the bearings, and the shaft seals. By 2 in the morning, I was running final tests. By 8 the next morning, it was ready. Tom showed up with a small crew and a truck to transport the motor. As they were loading it, Geraldine's white Mercedes pulled into the parking lot of my workshop. She got out, and for the first time since I had met her, she didn't look supremely confident. She looked nervous. "Mr. Anderson, do you have a moment?" Tom and his crew paused in their loading. I nodded. "Sure. I wanted to discuss the upcoming board hearing. It's come to my attention that there may have been some miscommunication about your commercial status." "Miscommunication," I repeated flatly. "Yes, and I think we can resolve this amicably without further legal action. The board is prepared to offer a conditional use permit that would allow you to continue your operations under certain guidelines." "What kind of guidelines?" She pulled out another folder. I was beginning to think she carried them everywhere. "Restrictions on operating hours, limitations on vehicle traffic, requirements for soundproofing and visual screening. Nothing too onerous." I took the folder and flipped through it. The restrictions were, in fact, pretty onerous. No work before 8 in the morning or after 6 in the evening. No more than 2 customer vehicles on the property at a time. A requirement to build a decorative wall around the entire workshop at my expense. Estimated cost, $40,000. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I already have a grandfathered commercial variance. Judge Whitman said so." Judge Whitman issued a temporary order. The full hearing could go differently. "Are you actually threatening me right now? After you illegally shut off my power and I had to take you to court to get it turned back on?" Her expression hardened. "I'm trying to find a reasonable compromise, Mr. Anderson. But if you prefer to take your chances in court, that's your choice." She turned and walked back to her Mercedes. Tom watched her go, then looked at me. "She's panicking," he said quietly. "The board is in chaos right now. 3 members are talking about voting her out as president." because of the pump situation. That and other things. Geraldine's been making unilateral decisions for months, and this situation finally made people pay attention. Brenda Chen is gathering signatures for a special election. He and his crew finished loading the pump motor and drove off. I stood in my workshop thinking about Geraldine's offer and what it meant. She was trying to save face, to create a narrative where she was being reasonable and I was being difficult. But she had massively overplayed her hand, and now she was scrambling. I called Patricia and explained the situation. "Don't sign anything," she said immediately. "That conditional use permit is a trap. If you sign it, you're essentially admitting that you need the HOA's permission to operate, which undermines our entire legal position. We stick with the grandfathered variance." That's what I thought. What happens at the full hearing? We present the same evidence, but in more detail. I'll depose some HOA board members, get them on record about the decision-making process. If Geraldine really did call a special session without proper notice to the full board, that's a violation of Arizona's nonprofit corporation statutes. We could potentially invalidate all the decisions made at that session. The full hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I kept working, and I kept getting calls from people throughout Meadowbrook Springs who needed pump repairs. It seemed like every other day, something was breaking down. The fountain at the clubhouse failed. I fixed it. 2 more irrigation systems for common areas needed emergency service. I handled them both. A homeowner's well pump died, leaving her without water for 3 days until I could install a replacement. Every single time I documented the work: date, time, location, description of the problem, parts used, labor hours. I was building a record that showed exactly how critical my services were to the community. A week before the hearing, I got a call from Brenda Chen again. "Mr. Anderson, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've got enough signatures to call for a special election to replace Geraldine as board president. The vote is happening at the annual meeting next month." "That's great, but it doesn't help me with the hearing next week." "Actually, it might. I've been talking to the other board members, and we want to settle this before it gets to court. We're prepared to issue a formal apology, acknowledge your grandfathered status, and pay your legal fees. All you have to do is drop the lawsuit." "I'll talk to my lawyer." I did. Patricia was skeptical. "It's a good offer," she admitted, "but I want it in writing, signed by a majority of the board, not just Geraldine, and I want the settlement agreement to explicitly state that your commercial variance is valid and cannot be challenged by the HOA in the future. Can you draft that?" "Already working on it." The next few days were tense. Patricia went back and forth with Morrison, the HOA's attorney, hammering out the exact language of the settlement. Meanwhile, I kept getting calls from Meadowbrook Springs residents who needed my services. Then, 3 days before the scheduled hearing, everything went sideways. I was in the workshop, rebuilding a circulation pump for the community pool, when my phone rang. It was Tom. "Rob, we've got a major problem. Someone vandalized the control panel for the Lake B pump system, tore out a bunch of wiring, smashed the circuit boards. The pump is dead, and I can't even tell what needs to be replaced until we get in there and assess the damage." "When did this happen?" "Sometime last night. Security cameras were disabled. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my tools and drove over to the pump house for Lake B. It was a small concrete building at the edge of the development, surrounded by oleander bushes and landscaping. Tom met me outside, looking grim. "It's bad," he said. He wasn't kidding. Someone had taken a crowbar or a hammer to the control panel, smashing components and ripping out wires. It was thorough and deliberate destruction, not random vandalism. This is going to take days to fix," I said, examining the damage. "I'll need to order replacement circuit boards, rewire the whole system, recalibrate everything. We're talking a week minimum, maybe 2. Can you at least get the pump running in the meantime?" "Not without the control system. These pumps are too sophisticated to run manually." Tom swore under his breath. "Geraldine is going to lose her mind. The houses around Lake B are some of the most expensive in the development. If the water starts going bad, we're going to have homeowners screaming for someone's head." I took detailed photos of the damage and called Patricia. "Someone sabotaged the Lake B pump system. Professional job. Looks like they knew exactly what they were doing." Do you think it's connected to your legal case? I don't know, but the timing is awfully convenient. I'm going to recommend you file a police report. This is criminal mischief at minimum, possibly more if it can be linked to the HOA dispute. I called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and explained the situation. They sent a deputy out within an hour. He took statements from both me and Tom, photographed the damage, and filed a report. We'll investigate, the deputy said, but without witnesses or camera footage, it's going to be tough to identify a suspect. After he left, I started the process of ordering replacement parts and planning the repair. It was going to be expensive and time-consuming, and Lake B was going to be out of commission for at least 10 days. Word spread fast. By the next morning, I'd received 6 calls from homeowners near Lake B, all of them upset about the situation and demanding to know when the pump would be fixed. I explained the situation each time, emphasizing that this was the result of deliberate vandalism, not equipment failure. On the second call, the homeowner said something interesting. I heard Geraldine saying she wished there was a way to prove you weren't as essential as people claimed. You don't think she had anything to do with this, do you? I have no idea, I said carefully, but if you heard her say that, you might want to mention it to the sheriff's deputy investigating the vandalism. 2 days before the scheduled hearing, I got another call from Brenda Chen. Rob, I need to tell you something, and you need to keep it confidential for now. One of the board members came to me yesterday. He said Geraldine approached him 2 weeks ago and asked if he knew anyone who could make a point about your workshop not being critical infrastructure. He didn't think much of it at the time, but after the vandalism, he's connecting the dots. Is he willing to testify to that? He's scared. Geraldine has a lot of influence, and he doesn't want to get sued, but I'm working on him. This is insane. I know. But if we can prove Geraldine was involved in the vandalism, this goes from an HOA dispute to a criminal case. I called Patricia and told her what Brenda had said. She was quiet for a long moment. If this is true, we need to be very careful. We can't make accusations without evidence. But I'm going to call the sheriff's office and make sure they're aware that there may be a connection between the vandalism and your legal case. The day before the hearing, I was working in my shop when 2 sheriff's deputies showed up. One of them was the deputy who had taken the initial report. The other was a detective named Sarah Martinez. Mr. Anderson, we have some follow-up questions about the vandalism, Detective Martinez said. We sat in my small office, and she pulled out a notebook. We've been interviewing people at the HOA, and a couple of interesting things have come up. First, the security cameras at the Lake B pump house were disabled using an administrative override code. Only 4 people have that code: the facilities manager, 2 board members, and the HOA president. Tom wouldn't have done this. He's been killing himself trying to keep the infrastructure running. We agree. We've cleared him. But we're looking closely at the others. Second, we pulled phone records. Geraldine Vandermeer made 3 calls to a number registered to a commercial maintenance company in Phoenix the week before the vandalism. We're trying to get in touch with that company now. So you think she hired someone? We're following the evidence, but I wanted to ask you, has Ms. Vandermeer made any direct threats or statements about wanting to damage your business? Not directly to me, but I've heard secondhand that she was talking about wanting to prove I wasn't essential. Martinez made notes. Okay, we're going to keep investigating. In the meantime, if Ms. Vandermeer or anyone associated with the HOA contacts you, document everything. The hearing the next day was surreal. We all gathered in the same courtroom, but the atmosphere was completely different. Morrison, the HOA's attorney, looked uncomfortable. Geraldine sat at the defendant's table, her expression frozen in a mask of calm that didn't match the tension in her shoulders. Patricia stood up to present our case, but before she could start, Morrison raised his hand. Your Honor, the HOA would like to request a continuance. Some new information has come to light that requires us to reassess our position. Judge Whitman frowned. What kind of information? I'm not at liberty to discuss it in open court at this time, but it relates to an ongoing criminal investigation. The judge looked at Patricia, who looked at me. I gave a tiny nod. She turned back to the judge. We have no objection to a continuance, Your Honor, provided that Mr. Anderson's electrical service remains active and the HOA agrees not to take any further enforcement actions pending the outcome of the investigation. So ordered, Judge Whitman said. We'll reconvene in 30 days. Mr. Morrison, I expect you to have your house in order by then. We left the courthouse, and Patricia pulled me aside in the hallway. Something big is happening. Morrison wouldn't ask for a continuance unless Geraldine was in serious trouble. She was right. 3 days later, Detective Martinez called me. Mr. Anderson, I wanted to let you know that we've made an arrest in the Lake B vandalism case. Geraldine Vandermeer has been charged with criminal mischief, conspiracy to commit criminal mischief, and abuse of authority. We found text messages between her and a contractor she hired to disable the pump system. She apparently thought that if you couldn't fix the problem quickly, it would undermine your position that you were essential to the community. Is she in jail? She posted bail this morning, but she's facing serious charges. The county attorney is also looking at whether there are any civil rights violations related to the utility shutoff. The news spread through Meadowbrook Springs like wildfire. That evening, I got calls from at least a dozen residents, all of them shocked and asking if I had heard. The local news picked up the story, running a segment about the HOA president who allegedly sabotaged community infrastructure to win a legal dispute. The special election to replace Geraldine happened 2 weeks later. Brenda Chen won by a landslide. One of her first acts as the new HOA president was to issue a formal apology to me, acknowledge my grandfathered commercial status in writing, and agree to pay all my legal fees. The criminal case against Geraldine took longer to resolve. She pleaded not guilty initially, but when the text messages between her and the contractor were introduced as evidence, her attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and conspiracy, receiving 2 years of probation, a $10,000 fine, and an order to pay restitution for the damage to the Lake B pump system. The total cost of that repair ended up being just over $8,000, which I billed to the HOA. They paid without complaint. The continuance on the civil case got extended twice more as the criminal proceedings played out, but eventually we were back in Judge Whitman's courtroom. This time, the HOA was represented by a different attorney, and Brenda Chen sat at the defendant's table instead of Geraldine. The new attorney, a woman named Lisa Carmichael, stood up and addressed the court. Your Honor, the HOA wishes to withdraw all challenges to Mr. Anderson's commercial operations. We acknowledge that his business is properly licensed, legally grandfathered under state zoning laws, and provides essential services to our community. We have reached a settlement agreement with Mr. Anderson that includes payment of his legal fees and a written acknowledgement of his right to operate. Judge Whitman looked at Patricia, who nodded. We accept the settlement, Your Honor. Very well. Case dismissed. Mr. Anderson, good luck with your business. I walked out of the courthouse for the last time, blinking in the Phoenix sunshine. Patricia shook my hand. Congratulations. You won. Thanks for everything. You did most of the work just by being good at your job. Geraldine made the mistake of going after someone the community actually needed. I drove back to Meadowbrook Springs and spent the rest of the afternoon in my workshop, catching up on the backlog that had accumulated during the legal drama. Around 5, Miguel stopped by to pick up another rebuilt pump. Man, that was quite a saga, he said as I helped him load the equipment into his truck. Is it really over? Looks like it. Geraldine pleaded guilty, the HOA dropped the case, and I'm back to business as usual. You going to stay here, after everything? I looked around at my workshop, at the shelves full of parts and the workbenches covered with tools. I had built this business from nothing, and despite all the drama, it was thriving. I had customers who depended on me, and I was good at what I did. Yeah, I said, I'm staying. Over the next few months, things slowly returned to normal. I kept getting calls for pump repairs, and I kept fixing them. The Lake B system was fully operational again. The fountain at the clubhouse worked perfectly. The irrigation systems kept the common areas green. Brenda Chen turned out to be a much better HOA president than Geraldine had been. She focused on actual community issues rather than petty enforcement of obscure rules. She even came by my workshop one afternoon to personally thank me for not giving up. A lot of people would have just left after what Geraldine put you through, she said. I thought about it, I admitted, but this is my business. I wasn't going to let her drive me out. Well, we're glad you stayed, and I'm sorry you had to go through all that. Is Geraldine still living here? Brenda shook her head. She moved about a month ago, sold her house and relocated to Scottsdale. I think the shame of the criminal conviction was too much. I couldn't say I felt bad about that. Life went on. I hired an assistant, a young guy named Kevin, who was good with his hands and eager to learn the trade. Business was strong enough that I needed the help, and it was nice to have someone to share the workload. About 6 months after the case was finally dismissed, I got a call from Tom. "Rob, I've got a question for you. The board is looking at doing a complete overhaul of the pump systems over the next 2 years. New equipment, better efficiency, modern control systems. Would you be interested in bidding on the service contract?" "How big are we talking?" "Probably $200,000 over 2 years. Full maintenance, emergency repairs, system upgrades, the works." It was the biggest contract I had ever been offered. I told Tom I would put together a proposal, and I spent the next week working on it. When I submitted the bid, I made sure to include references from every major job I had done in Meadowbrook Springs over the past 5 years. I won the contract. The board voted unanimously to award it to me, with Brenda Chen specifically noting during the vote that my expertise and reliability had been proven beyond any doubt. That contract transformed my business. I was able to expand the workshop, buy better equipment, and hire 2 more assistants. I became the go-to guy not just for Meadowbrook Springs but for several other communities in the area. Word got around that I was reliable, knowledgeable, and professional. A year after the case ended, I was working in the shop when I got an unexpected visitor. It was Dennis Morrison, the attorney who had represented the HOA during the initial dispute. "Mr. Anderson, do you have a minute?" "Sure," I said, wiping grease off my hands. "I wanted to apologize. I took Geraldine's version of events at face value, and I should have done more due diligence before taking aggressive legal positions. What she did was wrong, and I should have caught it earlier." "I appreciate that," I said, "but you were just doing your job." "Maybe. But I've been thinking about that case a lot. It was a good reminder that HOA disputes aren't always black and white, and that board members can have their own agendas that don't align with the community's best interests." He left, and I went back to work, thinking about how strange the whole experience had been. What started as a simple power shutoff had turned into a criminal case, a legal battle, and ultimately a vindication of everything I had built. Looking back, I think Geraldine's biggest mistake was assuming that the rules mattered more than reality. She was so focused on enforcing the letter of the HOA guidelines that she completely ignored the practical consequences of her actions. She saw me as a zoning violation, not as a critical service provider. And when reality proved her wrong, when pumps started failing and no one else could fix them, she doubled down instead of admitting her error. The vandalism was a desperate attempt to rewrite reality, to create a situation where I really wasn't essential. But you can't vandalize your way out of incompetence, and you can't enforce your way out of a bad decision. I never saw Geraldine again after she moved away. I heard through the grapevine that she was facing a civil lawsuit from some of the Lake B homeowners who claimed that her actions had damaged their property values. I didn't follow that case closely. It wasn't my problem anymore. What I did focus on was building my business and serving my customers. Every time I fixed a pump, installed a new system, or trained one of my assistants, I was reminded of why I had fought so hard to stay. This was my work. This was what I was good at. And no one, not even an overzealous HOA president with a folder full of regulations, was going to take that away from me. 3 years after the whole mess started, I was invited to speak at a conference for small business owners in Arizona. The topic was dealing with regulatory challenges, and the organizers thought my story would be relevant. I stood in front of about 200 people and told them what happened. I talked about the importance of documentation, the value of having a good attorney, and the need to understand your legal rights. But mostly, I talked about the importance of being genuinely good at what you do. Geraldine thought she could shut me down because I was breaking a rule, I said. But the community needed me because I provided value. In the end, that's what mattered. If I had been a mediocre pump repair guy, the HOA probably would have won. But because I was the only person who could keep their infrastructure running, they had no choice but to back down. After the speech, several people came up to ask questions or share their own stories of dealing with difficult HOA situations. One woman told me that her HOA had tried to fine her for running a home daycare, even though she was licensed and her neighbors had no complaints. Another man described a 3-year battle over a solar panel installation that the HOA claimed violated aesthetic guidelines. These stories reminded me that what happened to me wasn't unique. HOAs across the country were making similar mistakes, prioritizing rules over reason and creating conflicts that served no one's interests. But they also reminded me that standing up for yourself, documenting everything, and getting good legal help could make all the difference. I drove back to Meadowbrook Springs that evening, past the lakes and the manicured lawns and the houses in 17 different shades of beige. The fountain at the clubhouse was running perfectly, fed by pumps that I maintained. The irrigation systems were keeping the common areas green. Lake B was clear and clean, its pump system fully operational after the repairs I had made. This was my community now, not in spite of the legal battle, but in a strange way, because of it. I'd proven my value in the most dramatic way possible, and everyone knew it. I pulled into my workshop driveway and sat in my truck for a moment, looking at the building that had been at the center of so much controversy. The lights were on inside, where Kevin was finishing up some late work. Through the windows, I could see the shelves of parts, the workbenches, the tools I used every day. It was just a metal building on a piece of land in suburban Arizona, but it was mine, and I had fought to keep it. That was worth something. I got out of the truck and walked inside, ready to see what Kevin had accomplished and to plan the next day's work. There were pumps to fix, systems to maintain, and customers who were counting on me. It was a good life. And despite everything Geraldine Vandermeer had tried to do, I was still here, still working, still serving the community that had ultimately stood by me when it mattered most. The power was on, the tools were running, and the water kept flowing. In the end, that was all that really mattered.